Jared, you ready for another episode, man?
I think I am. Yeah,
Hey, you want to just skip the formality and just jump right into this thing?
that's an awesome idea. After
Awesome,
what, 39
awesome.
episodes? What is it, like now, 38,
Yeah,
39, something
yeah.
like that? Yeah.
I had a hard time sleeping last night,
Uh,
and I had to dude, I'm not this way at all, but I seriously felt like, Priscilla, I really need to snuggle with you. And I wasn't scared, but listen to what I read, man. The whole kids dying and stuff. I think I've gotten over the unhealthy infatuation / fear and all that stuff for myself, but it still affects me deeply when I hear about other people having to suffer that kind of loss. Listen, and hey, I'm actually a little bit psyched just to get this out here to all of our listeners, because after reading this article, I was like, man, that can happen to anybody. But listen to something that's picking up in society is, all right, so I'll just give you an example. The businessman, he's on his cell phone and he's on the way to work, and he's like got a lot of stuff to do, but he's got to get to that meeting. Pulls into the parking lot, he's still on his phone, grabs his briefcase that's in the passenger seat, opens the door, slams the door behind him. He starts walking in the office. So he gets to his office 9 o'clock. 4 o'clock, his wife calls him and says, hey, I just went to daycare to pick up little Henry, and she said you never dropped him off. Next thing you know, this guy's heart
oh
sinks,
my
and he
God.
realizes he never dropped his kid off, and his kid's just been baking in the sun. Kid's dead.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's this guy. I mean, you just see the look of this father in court, because that's manslaughter.
Sure.
But I'm sure he doesn't necessarily even care about that. All he can think about is the fact that he allowed his son to be tortured for the last 7 hours of their life. So anyway, this article went into the different professions that this happens to.
This
and
happens
it's not,
regularly? Like,
I mean, we're talking probably 30 cases annually or
wow.
something. I wish I wrote down the numbers,
Yeah.
but basically, it's not not a respecter of class. Like, there's upper class people, super highly, big business owners, professionals, all the way, down to people that learned a trade and are going to different houses fixing stuff. It happens to people. And they even said that there's this one situation where the guy's car alarm kept going off, and he would get up and look out his office window and make sure nobody was out there, and then he would just click the button,
Right.
and it was his kid being frantic. It's just devastating.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to ask you is, are you just absolutely blown away when people, nowadays the internet opens the door for people to even be able to do this. But I was thinking about the parents that go on there and start criticizing the parent that allowed such and such to happen. It just hit me. I was just like, you know what? These things do happen. They're called accidents.
Right.
I mean, they're called accidents. It's
Yeah.
not, so, but I was thinking about a little further. So we also use the phrase a careless accident. And I've always heard careless accident to mean a careless person, to mean kind of that's a negative, derogatory reference to someone. Like if you
Yeah.
say that was a careless mistake, it's
Right.
almost like you're pointing the finger saying, hey, that's bad. You should have known better. How dare you? You're like a disgusting person for this careless mistake. But don't we all make careless mistakes? Like any one of those people that left their kid in the car during a whole day's work, that was a careless mistake, right?
Yeah, but I don't know, man. I mean, there's different categories of mistakes, and making a mistake on a math test by not carrying your one versus leaving your kid in the car to bake for 8 hours. I mean, I definitely don't want to criticize these people, but I mean, I don't know how they could do that.
Right.
Sure, it's an accident. I'm sure they didn't mean to do that, but that means their mind was totally not where it should have been.
Yeah.
They were preoccupied with things that clearly were not nearly as important as their child they were supposed to take to daycare.
Yeah, but
So
don't
it's
you think
Go ahead.
don't you think everybody's mind gets preoccupied in a way that, like, you may have not done that, but when Emma and Caroline were super young, you may have had like 5 minutes go by to where if they did sneak away, they could have jumped into a pool in which they would have drowned. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't you think?
I think that's a little bit different still. I mean, you put your kids in the car.
Yeah.
You're driving your car with the kids in the car that you put in there with a destination in mind when you put the kids in there, and to have 8 hours go by and totally forget about your kids, I just think it's a different class of carelessness. Yeah. So I would argue that that's a different category. That's, I would say, inexcusable. Now, blanking out for 5 minutes because the phone rings or something, that's 5 minutes as opposed to 8 hours. So it's a big difference.
Right. Would you agree that regardless of how legitimate of offense that people go to the internet to express, that's probably not the right platform
100%.
Or timing?
100%.
Like this family that's suffering the loss of their kids in Orlando, that, eaten by an alligator. I mean, first of all, I would say that could have happened to any of us.
Yeah.
From what I understand, the kid's feet were in the water.
Right.
I mean, come on, who wouldn't have let him do that?
Yeah.
But still, it's just like these parents are grieving at the sight of an alligator dragging their kid out into the water, and you want to go on the internet and tell them how horrible they are.
That's
I think
ridiculous.
They know. I think they feel horrible enough. So anyway, that was a super bummer intro, but it's going to get a lot more excited because this is our Donald Trump episode in which we actually have a Donald Trump supporter and let's just say a Donald Trump non-supporter, skeptic. So we're looking forward to this one, just considering November is right around the corner, in which we will know whether or not Donald Trump is the next president of the United States.
And for me, this is going to be total education because I'm woefully uninformed, and I hear all these bad things about Trump. I'm not sure how much of that is like, hype, sensationalism, exaggeration, or what. So
maybe he's a great person.
Well, I don't know. Like, I'm basing all of this on what the mainstream media is saying, and people that are around me. They could be right, but I just want to know. I kind of want to get to the bottom and have more of a better understanding of who Trump really is. I kind of like the idea that he's pissing people off. That's attractive to me, but I don't like racism or misogyny. So if he is guilty of that, then that's definitely a red flag. So I'm interested. I'm curious.
Awesome. All right, so we're here with our guests. We have Carrie, who is, we're starting to have people on regularly enough to where they're just friends of the podcast, and you guys are hearing a lot from the Jack Hoys, and we have the daddy here today. Carrie and Jack, I don't think y'all been on an episode together, so introduce you to each other. Carrie and Andy Gill are really good friends. That's how I met Carrie, so... we had to fire Andy, but that's okay. All right. Well, the Trump episode, we're going to be talking about Donald Trump. Like Jared said, I'm in the same boat as Jared. I feel like I need to be educated. Obviously, we're hearing, all the stuff out there. I want to just ask this, though. Here's what I don't understand about Donald Trump and where we're at in the media and all that. Listen to this. Every person I talk to, Carrie, you would be an exception right now, and then there's two other people that I know that are Trump supporters. Everybody else, and I mean, I'm in a bunch of different circles. I'm not just hanging out with one demographic. Nobody thinks Trump would be a good president. Everybody I talk to, for the most part, and so I'm like, how did this guy get to where he's at? Who are all these people that supported him to the point where he is running for president? And it's just, maybe it's just irony, but I hardly ever talk to someone who cannot believe that Donald Trump is running for president. I mean, are all the other people that support just kind of staying quiet, or am I kind of an exception to the rule?
Well,
have you encountered the same thing?
What's that?
Have you encountered the same sort of thing? I mean, have you talked to
I've met two. I know two pretty well. We were at a dinner one night, and I didn't know at the time, we started talking politics, and all of a sudden both of them started saying how much they like Trump, they like his policy ideas, blah blah blah. So those are really the first two that have ever talked well about Donald Trump, and they actually had really good things to say. Like they were actually meaningful things to say. It wasn't just bad mouthing Hillary Clinton. They actually had meaningful intellectual discourse about Donald Trump.
Gotcha. Carrie, what were you going to say?
I forget.
Oh, no problem.
I think what it is Trump right now is representing the silent majority, I believe, and they're called silent majority because what they have to say is probably more traditional.
They're embarrassed.
Well, afraid of the PC police.
That's true. That's true. I mean, you say you're a Trump supporter, and next thing you know, you hate all the people that he seems to hate, which isn't fair.
The other thing I would say, though, is I do think it's age-related to some extent.
Yeah.
I certainly know more than 2 Trump supporters. There's been some people who have kind of surprised me. But it's funny, I was talking to my 96-year-old aunt the other day.
Yeah.
And she and my 91-year-old uncle had decided that that's who they were voting for. So, as I think about it, when you said that, Joey, I would say most of the people that I know who are supporting Trump tend to be probably 50 or older.
Wow, that is interesting. So, Carrie, you don't fall in the 50-plus.
No.
You do support a Trump presidency. Tell us why.
I think my main draw to Trump was the minute he popped up on the scene, for me, it just flashed Americana. It was everything. I think he represented a good time in America's recent history. And so when he says America first, and then, opposite him, you have Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, globalism, it's a very, what would you say? It's just very inviting. It's almost a relief, actually, I would say, in today's political climate.
So would you say Trump is just way better of a choice than a Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton, or would you choose Trump over a lot of other Republicans?
I was for Trump almost from the beginning. I think once he put his hat in the ring, I started leaning that way over everyone that was currently in the field. And we had a pretty good Republican field this year. Was it like 17 candidates?
Yeah.
I did prefer Rand Paul.
Right.
So I'm very conservative. But, he was definitely one of my top ones. And so I did choose him over many others.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people I know that were close to me that kind of, threw me a weird stare,
Yeah.
So.
Carrie, I'm curious. You described yourself as very conservative. Rand Paul is kind of the libertarian wing of the Republican Party. Does Trump strike you as a conservative? Is that how you describe him?
No, the similarity between the two, you're probably wondering how do I go from Rand Paul to Donald Trump, right? It's not that they have the same personality, but what they do have is an America first mentality. You can decide whether or not you believe Trump when he says it, but he is leaning, with his Supreme Court picks towards a more constitutionalist stance. That's what he's publicly proclaiming, which is good. And quite frankly, it's probably better than over half the initial Republican field to begin with.
Carrie, can you explain to everybody why you hate Muslims?
No. See, that's a misconception. I
know. I'm definitely being sarcastic. Jack, would you consider yourself a Trump supporter?
No.
What would you call yourself in regards to Trump?
I would say, let's say, highly skeptical. And from a number of different points of view. I think my starting point would be to support someone. I would have to have, first of all, some sense for what they're going to do. I don't have any sense for Donald Trump. His policy, they're kind of a blank slate in terms of economic policy. If you can describe his tax policy or his spending policy to me, I haven't been able to form any clear picture, and I don't think there is one. Furthermore, honestly, I feel this way very much about Hillary Clinton. It's like, if you know that somebody is a liar, what difference does it make what they say? I've followed his career for about 25 years, and lack of integrity is his defining characteristic as a human being, from what I see. And I say that again from watching him over 25 years. He paints himself as a brilliant businessman. First of all, he inherited several $100 million.
Which he lost at some point in his
Well,
career, right?
he's had ups and downs, as lots of business people do, and particularly developers. That's a tough business. But what he's gotten good at is cheating people, really. He doesn't pay his bills. His art of the deal is to try to deceive people into entering into a deal where they are on the hook for everything and he is on the hook for nothing.
Sounds like a good position for America in the global economy.
Tell me about that, because the whole America First thing puzzles me. Why do you think that that's, A, something that is a good idea, and B, why do you think
why wouldn't it be a good idea? If it's not America first, then it's globalism, which means we continue to lose jobs to markets overseas. We continue to pay essentially tariffs to China, and then we support the flow of all these immigrants coming in that will work for smaller wages to send back to their home countries where the cost of living is cheaper. This does not benefit me or my family or my progeny.
Okay, so let me give you an example. Like, here's what I would say is that I completely disagree that globalism is the problem in terms of job loss. So let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, there was a biography of Andrew Carnegie. He was kind of probably the most significant figure in the early years of the steel industry in the United States. And I'm from Pittsburgh, so that was an interesting book for me. And after I read the book, I did some research, and long and short of it is, I actually have you got to be an old person to remember what an almanac was, but I have an almanac from the year 1900. In the year 1900, there were 684,000 steel workers in the United States, probably half of them in Pittsburgh, producing 10 million tons of steel a year. Today, there are about 85,000 steel workers, producing 100 million tons of steel a year. In other words, for every, what it takes one worker to produce today, it took 70 workers to produce 115 years ago. And if you look at 3% productivity growth over that period of time, that's where you get. The issue is not that globalization is taking jobs. Manufacturing is shrinking, but not really because of globalization. It's a minor factor. And I could run through the numbers with you for that in any other industry. There is a huge issue, but what I would say is that none of the candidates, I don't know of anyone who has an answer for it. The issue is that when agricultural productivity started to soar, by the way, in the year 1900, 37% of the workforce worked in agriculture. Now that number is about 1% because of incredible productivity growth in agriculture. The good news was that was the time when manufacturing was surging, that 60, 70, 80-year period. So you had people coming off the farm going into manufacturing jobs, and standards of living rose. Now what's happening in manufacturing is the same thing that happened in agriculture. My prediction would be 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 1% of the workforce is going to be in manufacturing because it's just going to get that efficient. That's
well, no, you have to balance that with the other jobs. Sure, we don't need as many workers because we have manufacturing, we have assembly lines, but now we need people running the computers, running the infrastructure. Sure. In a different capacity. So I believe some of that balances out. But what you have is when you have the company that owns the manufacturing making all these billions of dollars overseas under different tax codes and they're able to invest and they don't have, they're not reinvesting in America. They're reinvesting in whatever their home country is more than likely.
But do you know why? So do you know that America is the only country that forces its companies with overseas operations to pay taxes on overseas income twice if they bring it back to the U.S.? We're the only industrialized country that does that. So why aren't these companies reinvesting in the U.S.? Because the U.S. government punishes them if they do so. And that's insane.
Yeah, but under which regimes has that happened though? I mean that's why I'm looking to Trump to change this. I think he's a great businessman, and you can say sure this is maybe this one particular aspect is a bad thing, and I don't know all the details, but that didn't come because of Trump. That came because of everything we've been through so far.
No question. I mean, right? He didn't invent that, but he's never said a word about eliminating it either. He seems to think a trade war is a good idea, and trade wars are disastrous. That's what the Great Depression was really about. It wasn't because the stock market crashed in 1929. It was because a recession was followed by massive tariff barriers started by the United States. It's called the Smoot-Hawley Act. And that's what really put the whole globe into a downward spiral.
Yeah, but what we need right now is someone who's going to reduce these ridiculous like EPA policies, right? And all these carbon taxes and things like this. That's also hurting the economy and complicating all of this. And so when I look at Trump, I look at someone who's going to remove, well, hopefully, remove or reduce a lot of this unnecessary overhead, these ridiculous regulations.
But here's the thing. I mean, I agree with you. I think you're exactly right. I think, in fact, I would argue that overregulation is probably more of an obstacle right now than anything else, because where that really hits is small business formation. And for the first time, the only other time in the history of the Republic where more small businesses were being closed than being open, the only other time that's happened is the Great Depression. And now, which is just crazy. And it's regulation that I would say is doing it. Here's my thing. Why do you think Trump's going to take that on? Here's my thing about him is he is stunningly ignorant and seems to have no desire to learn. My analogy would be this. If I had a brain tumor and I'm trying to figure out what to do, and you came to me and said, look, I know this guy who's pretty smart and he has real strong opinions about brain surgery and he's had a lot of success in real estate, I would not let him cut my head open. The presidency of the United States is the most difficult job in the world.
How closely are you following Trump, though? I could look at his speech yesterday even. I could look at the people he's surrounding himself with, Jeff Sessions, Dr. Ben Carson. It definitely, to me...
Well, I can't speak to their motivations. I'm just saying I don't see... I struggle to see anything positive. Sure, does he say something that makes sense every once in a while? Kind of. Does he mean it? Who knows?
I think he says stuff that makes sense all the time, and I think that's what the majority of the Republicans that voted in the primaries felt, which is why.
Do y'all think, Jared, I want you to chime in too first, since Donald Trump, you've met him, and he kind of...
I've met him?
Yeah, you sent a postcard of your daughters with him.
Yeah, I didn't meet him, though. He was basically at a bar mitzvah that I was at, and so my wife's like, oh, look, Donald Trump, why don't you go see him and get a picture with him? And that's how that... I never met him.
Okay, well, you've had coffee with him and talked with him a lot.
Sure, okay. I'm one of his advisors.
Do you guys think Donald Trump is surprised that he's here? Like, do you think there's like, I can't say this, but I cannot believe I am running for president? Like, do you think going into it, he probably was just like, I'll do this? I think
that he, deep down inside, I think he bet he could make it pretty far. But I think now that he is, the presumed nominee, I think he is pretty surprised. That's just my read, my take.
Anybody else want to talk into that?
Go ahead. I think I would agree with Jared for the most part. I saw a clip of Donald Trump when he was much younger. I think it was on Oprah, and she asked him if he'd ever run for president. He said, no, I don't think so, unless things got really bad. So when you fast forward to now, I think he saw really, I think he's thinking of his kids and his grandkids now. I think he sees that the country's in shambles. It was, the stars aligned. It was a great opportunity for him to jump in. I think he knew he would do well. As much as, an athlete would know that I can compete well, there's a great chance I can win. Do I know 100% that I'm going to win? No, because there's some good racers, but I think I got a pretty good shot.
It's interesting, and I think that's a good assessment, Kerry. I don't want to question his motive for doing what he's doing, because it seems to me that there's a fair amount of evidence that it's exactly what you say. One concern I have, though, one of the things that I would think is really negative about our current, I guess the whole backdrop of this election and our culture is that we're just extremely polarized as a country. And, you got this guy come in with this wonderful talent for insult, but how does that help that problem?
Oh, I think it helps directly. That's one of Joey's questions, right, about his embrace. Well, Joey gave one of those questions, but it's about his speech, and is it a good thing? I think his speech is a great thing, and it's refreshing. Political correctness has gone way too far. No one can say anything meaningful because you're just afraid you're going to get slammed by the PC police. I've had business in the corporate world where I've heard a lot recently. Don't bring any criticism unless you have a plan to make it better. Well, I'm sorry, if we're having a brainstorming session, I'm not going to have a solution right away, but I can tell you that this is a bad idea, right? And it's just this whole climate of it's really political correctness gone amok. No one can say what is meaningful because you have to couch it in 10 times as many words to soften the blow and not offend all these special groups.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think that he has a talent for kind of puncturing that pomposity, and and it's enjoyable to hear him do that sometimes. But he also, I think it's fair to say that he's said a lot of pretty horrific things about a lot of people who are as good Americans as you and I are. How do you bring a divided country together when you take that approach? And, oh, by the way, I would just say he's kind of a noisier, cruder version of Obama in that regard. I mean, I don't look at him as something completely new. I think the sad thing is we need a uniter like never before, and instead we got a guy who
no, well,
his attack.
Hey, real quick, let me ask this, Jack. Who do you think? When was the last major uniter? In your opinion, who's the last president that tried to unite us and did a pretty good job?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say George Bush tried to do that, but really lacked the skill set.
Yeah.
Poor communication.
Younger George Bush?
Yeah. George Bush, the elder George Bush, I will say he had the advantage of having a war. I mean, and I say that, I don't mean that war is good. What I mean is that the country does tend to come together when something like that happens. And, he only had one term. Bill Clinton was kind of a polarizing guy, but yet a guy that everybody liked. I think it'd be hard-pressed to call... I mean, I feel like Reagan's approach was more uniting. He got all of his changes through with a Democratic Congress, which is, if you think about that in today's terms, that's kind of a remarkable feat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I guess maybe part of what that says is that this whole path to polarization hasn't been just one person. It's been a long process.
Yeah, I personally think Trump's just ripping the Band-Aid off at this point. The country's been so polarized, it's almost like they need a rude awakening. He's the rude awakening. I think what the country needs is, before they'll unite behind some person, everyone needs a rude awakening. They need an enlightening. They need to stop being dazed by the amusements and look at what's really going on. I think he's helping to do that. And I think once it sets in, hopefully within the next month or two, hopefully before the general election, people will start to see things for what they really are and begin to see that uniting behind Trump is immensely better than uniting behind Hillary Clinton.
Well, Kerry, what would you say are some possible bad things to come out of a Trump presidency? I mean, obviously you're a realist, so what are some negative possibilities?
Well, you know what, John? It's funny that you asked. No lie, it's what I just said. Literally, I'm going to read this off the page. I said, unwinding of PC mess equals tensions, but necessary. I think that's what I just said over the past few minutes.
Yeah, gotcha. Jack, what would be some good things about a Trump presidency, potentially?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think I feel that we've had a real posture of weakness in world affairs, and one of the issues that we've had is, Russia and China both testing that very aggressively. One of my concerns right now is that we could face an even further aggression in the next 6 months because they would gamble that Obama won't do anything, and they better take what they can get now because who knows what comes next.
That's pretty scary.
Well, but I think would people take that risk with Trump? I would say probably not. They would look at him as who knows what the heck that guy would do.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And there's some benefits to that.
Right.
So, there are negatives, but that would be one. If you want to say a benefit, I don't think that we would have the
Now, Kerry, you were definitely in favor of that as far as people being way more hesitant to do anything to America, which obviously I think all of us would be happy with people being more hesitant to do stuff here. But don't you think that comes with risk as well? I mean, don't you think there's some bad things about being a loose cannon?
I think we'd have to be more specific. But all of these pros and cons are contextual. Is Trump the most ideal presidential candidate ever? No, I'm not trying to say that. What I'm saying, though, is for today, I think he's what we need more than he's not. So I think what we need now, when we've got North Korea just constantly poking and poking and poking, and really not listening, right? You've got Iran not listening, you've got North Korea not listening, and we're hardly doing anything. I know Obama comes out and says, well, these sanctions are the toughest they've ever been, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? North Korea they just launched a missile like 2 days ago or yesterday. We need someone who's willing to say, here's the line in the sand, and if you cross it, you're going to pay the price. North Korea should be gone by now. Hope that's not too inflammatory.
Well, really, what are you saying? Are you saying that we should bomb them until the sand glows, or what? What are you recommending there?
Well, it really depends. It depends. What it is following up on what you say you're going to do. Okay. Don't give a position of weakness.
I agree with
Make
that.
a line in the sand and say.
Okay. But then what's your threat if they cross it? Which they would probably.
Oh, you should always, depending on what you're talking about, right? If you're talking about a trade war, I don't think a trade war should erupt in military.
Let's use your example, North Korea.
Yeah, if North Korea continues, let's say, to test long-range warheads, and I saw someone yesterday that says within 2 years they'll probably have the nuclear option for their ballistic missiles. You have to neutralize that threat. When it was kind of like you remember Netanyahu, and he had his board with the bomb and the line, and he said, Iran's so close. Fortunately, I think they're still on their way, but it's taken longer than he thought, which is fortunate. But at some point, you have to draw a line in the sand. It's like a good analogy would probably be, right, the sand, not the Orlando guy, right, or any terrorist. You see them stockpiling the weapons. You see that their plans are drawn. They're just picking a time to attack. I don't think you wait for the attack. I think at some point you have to say, we have enough to take action.
So you just go kill everybody who makes you nervous?
No, I would suggest a special op coup or something, right? I mean, we overthrew, I don't think we should have, right? We destabilized the Middle East, but clearly
we used to do that, We used to go in and kill leaders that we didn't like and try to replace them. It's never worked very well.
Well, no, I agree, because, Obama's done it very poorly, right?
No,
that's just destabilized everything, but it's kind of like the whole, would you kill Hitler?
Kennedy, and we've made it illegal since then.
Look at it like bombing Japan, right? They estimate that saved how many millions of lives in World War II, more than were lost, right? That was a hard decision.
Right.
I would look at it as the same.
We're really the same. So we were at war then. Our national existence was at stake. Are you saying that's at stake with North Korea?
When they're saying the first chance they get, they're going to launch a long-range missile with a nuclear warhead to the United States, I think you take them seriously. But then again, I'm not privy to all the intelligence, so I'm speaking as just an average American citizen. So you got to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I agree. But, so here's the deal. I mean, I think Donald Trump doesn't have any more information than you do, and it doesn't seem to me like he's.
Well, I don't expect him to. Although I think once he gets the official nomination, he's going to start getting briefings. So I think we all have to cut Donald Trump a little slack. I've heard a lot of people say, well, he doesn't, have everything lined out in a 1,000-page essay on how he's going to fix everything. I don't expect him to, quite frankly.
But
if he did, I thought he'd have an agenda that somebody pre-prepared it for him. What I see is someone who's figuring things out, and he has his gut tells him what needs to happen. He's surrounding himself with advisors. He's building his plan. I think that's natural.
Well, he's said that he's his own foreign policy advisor, and it shows. I mean, here's a guy who didn't know what the nuclear triad is, who asked the other day about Brexit and didn't know what that was. I mean, the guy's ignorance is stunning. And, here's a guy who's made a habit of insulting other countries, other peoples. I mean, like, I work with a cross-cultural ministry, and if you think that ignorance is going to allow us to have an effective foreign policy, I just, I get back again to would you have a real estate guy operate in your brain?
No, but that's the point. Trump's not going to do everything. No president does everything. They have a cabinet. I'm really hoping that Trump's cabinet is just like the dream team. I believe it could be. But that's really, for me, what's going to decide how effective his presidency would be, is when he announces who his cabinet members will be. That's going to tell me everything.
Kerry, going back to the rhetoric, like I'm 100% on board with being blunt, piercing the PCBS. But have you heard anything in public speeches that offended your Christian sensibilities, like in terms of racism or misogyny?
No, not really. I mean, he's a bold talker. I don't personally hurl insults, right? I think the Bible says you shouldn't do that. And like I've said, I heard this very early on, especially when Cruz was in the race and Carson. I think I mentioned on another podcast, I actually got kicked out of an independent fundamental Baptist Facebook group because I was pro-Trump. I mean, It was that sharp a divide, right?
Yeah.
And it's, I'm not voting for my pastor, all right? I'm voting for I'm voting for the president of America, right? The president of the United States in the 21st century. I have a vastly different criteria.
Yeah, but seriously though, like Jared's question, Trump hasn't said anything that has and I don't even mean has turned your stomach to where you're like, oh, I can't stand that guy, but to where as a Christian you're like, oh man, I'm going to vote for this guy.
I don't know that I have. It sounds like you guys have something in mind. Am I missing something? Do you guys want to throw a quote at me?
That's the thing. 'Cause I think I'm missing something too, because people are always saying, I can't believe he said this. I can't believe he said that. I've never actually heard him say anything.
Okay.
No, I can tell you.
Let me give you a quote that I read today. Okay. Now, again, remember that a year ago he said that, John McCain wasn't a hero because he got captured, and he doesn't like guys that get captured. And, of course, the guy was shot down, and he had a broken arm, 2 broken arms and a broken leg, but okay. So Trump said, quote, that he has been, quote, very brave by ignoring the danger of venereal disease during all of his sexual conquests. Then here's the rest of the quote. It's a dangerous world out there. It's scary, like Vietnam, sort of like the Vietnam era. It is my personal Vietnam. I feel like a great and very brave soldier, end quote.
Okay. That's ridiculous.
Yes.
That's all Jared needed. Do you need any more examples?
Well, no, but I mean, okay, so that's in poor taste, and it does show a degree of, I think, silliness. But in terms of like racially inflammatory or misogynistic comments, because that's what I'm hearing people are saying.
No.
Okay.
Let's just say that he's a narcissist. Would you agree with that?
I don't know if I could judge him as far as narcissist, but he's definitely a very confident person.
Do we think he's nice looking? Does any of us think that he's?
Well, back to the question though, I haven't found anything offensive, and I think what people have been saying, I mean, everything Donald Trump gets skewed. He says all Mexicans are rapists. No, he said that the ones coming over illegally tend to be not Mexico's best citizens, and I think that happens. Now, he doesn't say them all, but certainly that they enjoy leaving Mexico and coming here and doing what they can, because right now our immigration laws are so lax. ICE isn't even allowed to, or the Border Patrol isn't even allowed to arrest them. Border Patrol backed Trump, if you remember.
Interesting stuff. Okay, well, let me ask this. How about ISIS? Do you think that there's anything that we can do that would be effective in this sort of warfare that we're seeing from ISIS? And do you think Donald Trump would take some huge measures? Are there huge measures to be taken, and would Trump take them?
A war against ISIS that's a hard thing for me. I don't know. I think that would take a lot of counsel, even if I were the president, to determine what's best to do there, because you have they're somewhat centralized, but they're also decentralized. My personal opinion is if we can mitigate their attacks within the U.S., I think we are their most prized target. If we can do whatever we can to secure the United States and take direct action on their hubs to where they no longer can go and propagandize that they're destroying America, right? I think once that big target is lost, they'll lose steam. And then hopefully the European nations will follow suit. They'll see America standing up. They'll follow suit and say, okay, let's be a little tougher. Then hopefully ISIS can't do much there. And then before too long, hopefully you've got a coalition. You go in there and you destroy them at the root. That's my rainbows and unicorn speech.
I guess my fear there, though, is to do that, it's going to probably require a lot more surveillance. I already have a distrust of the government, so that's why I'm a little bit uneasy about that. But I guess the price of living in a free world.
I wouldn't go so far as to say we need to force Apple to put backdoors in iPhones, but we have to do something. I think ISIS could have been nipped in the bud early on if it had been done effectively and with adequate counsel. But of course, under Obama, nothing went well, and I think they got bigger than they should have, and now we have to deal with them in stronger ways than I think we could have early on.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, it's hard to look at anything Obama has done right in the Middle East. I would say that it's hard for me to look at anything that anybody has done in the last 30 years in the Middle East that's worked. I mean, that's just
I'll
a
agree.
morass. That's a tough one.
I agree. It's the Middle East is tough, and that's kind of why I liked Rand Paul. It would have been more of a let's just and I'm hoping Trump follows suit. Let's just focus on America, make our economy better. Let's definitely make ourselves safer. And
Yeah.
we may have to take a break and reevaluate. I definitely think we need to reevaluate what we're doing before we put more manpower and money into the Middle East.
Well, let me ask Jack this. Do you have an appreciation at all towards any sort of no-nonsense outlook on illegal immigration? Like Donald Trump definitely wants to represent this is ridiculous. If we want a strong country, everybody needs to play by the rules. Like, is that a value in your book?
Well, yeah, it is. But what I would say is, see, I guess I have a different view of the, however many million illegal aliens, most of whom came from Mexico and Central and South America, than you guys do. I had a manufacturing business. I employed a lot of them over the years. What happened was that you had a lot of people come in legally, and then after 9/11, the Immigration and Naturalization Service just froze. Like they it was such a bewildering situation. They didn't do anything for years. So you had a lot of guys came in on green cards, and then they couldn't get them renewed, and then they became illegal. And I'm not saying that's 11 million people, but more than you probably realize. And then ultimately, the government, they kind of weren't able to resolve what to do, and and in typical fashion, the government had no clear rules. They kind of had conflicting rules about how to handle it. When they finally got clarity on that, then again, at that point I had to let a number of guys go, and my sense is probably most of them went back. I think that's what you see is happening is that there are more people leaving the U.S. than coming in right now. And, to me, it's kind of a naturally regulating process. But I would also say, I'm not anti-immigrant. And do you need to have control over your borders? Absolutely. Do you need to have a process that works and makes sense? Yes. And, we clearly don't have either of those. I would say that the person who thinks you're going to send 11 million people back to where they came from is delusional.
How does he say he's going to do that? He probably doesn't. He just says
he's going to build his wall is going to be beautiful.
I think the mass deportation has been done before. It is possible. It depends on how much money you want to put into it. And I think at that point you really have to make sure you have the backing of the majority of the U.S. populace.
11 million people, though. I mean, that's decades and decades and decades.
Yeah, but how many of these people could also be ISIS infiltrants? I mean, it's just, what are you just going to say, throw your hands up and say, well, we got 11 million people that are, according to their words, they're undocumented. We have nothing on them, which, by the way, side note, Orlando shooter's wife, what Loretta Lynch said, apparently she doesn't know where she's at. Could be lying, but it's awfully scary that the AG of the United States doesn't know where the Orlando terrorist wife is. Anyway.
Whoa.
Well, anyway, immigration is one of those big complex issues. I completely agree that the borders need to be controlled. I think what's the wise thing to do with people already here? There are differing opinions, and I can understand why there are differing opinions. I mean, I have an opinion, but that doesn't make it the right one.
And you're saying he's delusional when he's talking about shipping 11 million people back just because it's impossible?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll ship them all back, but I think he should at least make a strong show about taking. So all these repeat felons, right? We got Kate's Law that people keep trying to put up about these illegal immigrants, and they commit these felonies, they get let out. You know what? They need to go permanently. Round all those people up, ship them out immediately, and have extremely tough sanctions. You come back, you're going to prison for 30 years. I don't know, something. You can make a show of force, definitely, that I think would dissuade illegal immigration.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, sure. I mean, that's all consistent with, you got to have control of your borders. I mean, if you send them back and you have no border control, then what's to keep them from coming back? And,
yeah. Now, the often overlooked group, though, is legal immigrants. Does anyone here know a legal immigrant? Because I do. I'd like to share a very quick story, but all right, good. Joey, I have two people I would say are my closest friends in the world. It's Andy Gill and a buddy of mine who's actually from Kosovo, who's Muslim.
Yeah. And
he is a legal immigrant. So when I say I back Trump, I have one of my best friends who's a legal Muslim immigrant. All right.
Are you saying a legal one or an illegal?
Legal.
Okay.
Legal.
Okay.
And so when I talk to him, when I say, hey, I say, what do you think about, he's had to pay thousands of dollars and had to have a sponsor to come over here. And his family's had to do the same thing. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars bringing their family over here. And it's like, well, what do you feel about illegal immigrants who can just bypass the process you had to go through? And he was not happy about that, right? So legal immigrants have a pretty tough stance against illegal immigration. I think it's an often overlooked opinion. And also, of course, I mentioned the Muslim thing because I think it's, Trump says, we need to ban all Muslims. I think it's easy to put some logic behind it, and I think he's already thinking this. You know that there's certain places like Pakistan, Iran, where it's, majority Sharia Muslims, right? And we know that these places are state sponsors of terror. I think it's very easy and responsible to say, no, you can't come here if you're from there, period, unless we can vet you. And if we can't vet you properly yet, you're going to have to wait. But then there's also Muslims that come from the Balkans or from Eastern Europe that are more of the moderate kind who definitely don't agree with the radical kind. And I think it'd be very easy to say, okay, the vetting process for you is going to be the same as it is for any immigrant. So I think there's definitely some room in Trump's quote-unquote Muslim ban for some common sense that I think would make America safer yet not offend the majority of Muslims.
The whole issue of we shouldn't profile anybody, I think that's one of these things that people feel like they have to say, and yet that is kind of stupid. I remember when my wife had a bone marrow transplant in 2001, and in early 2002 I was bringing her back from Seattle where she had the transplant, had to be there for a number of months, and of course it's X months after 9/11, and so, the TSA, who, of course, we're not going to profile anybody. We're going to randomly determine who we strip search, decide to strip search my wife, who's in a wheelchair with, medication bags hanging off her, and it's like, whatever. It's like kind of,
no sense.
Yeah, what a threat she was. I get that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, he looks at that stuff and says, the rules that we place on ourselves are crazy, and we need to be thinking of protecting our citizens first. I think it's something that's attractive to people.
And I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm sad that happened to your wife. I think what you were saying there is that's a case where profiling actually would have made sense. Your wife clearly was not a threat, right? And profiling makes sense. I think I've heard. I'll just say it's hearsay. I've heard that Israel naturally profiles, right, because they're under such threat. And they're very effective at screening out bad guys, people that want to blow folks up. And profiling isn't bad. I don't know why we think profiling is a bad thing. It's perpetuating stereotypes or something. What it is saying we have a majority of a population, and this is a common trait that we've noticed.
I think one of the issues with us is, our concern with it stems from legitimate concern, which is that we have, institutional racism in our past, and though it's diminished, it's in our present. And so, we don't want to continue to be people who do that, and so we've tried to come up with boundaries that we've applied to, not treat people inappropriately. The challenge is though that, ultimately, people aren't going to put up with not being safe,
right.
And you have to deal with that if you're a leader.
And you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that's ridiculous just to completely forgo that policy. But I do understand, too, where people who have been abused by this institutional racism, why they are up in arms. But again, it's a rational thing to do. If a bald, bearded white guy robbed a bank, I would fully expect to be profiled and questioned. You know what I'm saying? If I'm in the vicinity. Yeah. I'd have no problem with that.
Yeah. Jared, do you think he's the next president? Yes or no? I'm going to say yes. So.
I'm going to say, I don't like Hillary Clinton at all, but I think she probably will be the next president.
How about you, Kerry?
I really think Trump's got a better shot than Hillary. But it's hard to forecast. It's very uncertain at this point because they're both the same amount of popularity or unpopularity, whatever, what have you. But I think overall, people are going to look at Hillary and what she represents in the future, and the only other alternative is Trump. And I hope they make the right decision.
Jack, do you think he's going to be the next president?
I just think it's impossible to tell at this point. So here's what I think the issues are. Obviously, if he was running against any normal person, he would lose hands down because he's the most disliked candidate since they've been measuring how much people dislike certain candidates. But
would Hillary be number 2 on that list?
But Hillary running a close second. And oh, by the way, she is the worst campaigner maybe in modern history. And he's brilliant at getting under people's skin. And I'm sure he will get under hers. So, from that point alone, he has a chance. And if he, ends up, sounding more presidential, coming up with some things that people say that's actually a good idea, I think he's got a good chance because he's running against such a weak candidate. But I think I would have to say the odds are that she will win because I think people will view her as a safer candidate.
Yeah.
Well, I sure hope people don't view her as safe.
Safer.
Good grief. No, I don't think so. I wouldn't at least consider her
right.
safer.
I'm just saying,
I would think, if anything, she's just more well-known and may win just off that, I'm familiar with the name.
Now, what I would say is that she's cautious.
I don't know if I would agree with that either.
Well, I mean, that's my sense of her. And I would also say the good thing about the Clintons is they don't believe in anything. So you don't have to worry about them pursuing some ideological...
No. Here's the thing you have to worry about there. And I think Trump said it very well on his speech yesterday. He said, if we know that her email server had intrusions. We don't know if anything was taken, but why else would you intrude on a server without taking something? I think Putin's admitted to reading some emails, although, you could say that's,
well,
maybe he's just bluffing. But no, the point is, though, that there's a potential there already that Hillary Clinton can be blackmailed if she were to be president by foreign governments.
Understand. Understand. And she's a criminal. I mean, in my mind, no question about that. And I speak as somebody who's had a security clearance for many years. I mean, everything she said about that has been a lie. And, and she ought to be indicted from everything that I've seen. Trump will probably has a good chance of being indicted, too. I mean, that's what's fascinating about this race. It's like...
Indicted about what?
Well, for fraud.
Regarding?
Trump University, for one.
No, I think he'll win that case.
Maybe. Don't know. Again, it's fascinating that he hasn't released his tax returns. I mean, what's that about?
But he released financials, which he released everything but his tax return. Here's what everyone says about the tax return. Either he doesn't have as much money as he says, or he's avoided paying some taxes. Either one, I really couldn't care less.
So tax fraud. You're okay with tax fraud?
No, because I don't think he's committed tax fraud.
Yeah, well, again, it's...
No more than Hillary Clinton and her Clinton Foundation and all her Clinton Global Initiatives.
Hey, listen,
whatever else.
Believe me, you're not going to... I would not defend her integrity for a moment.
So, Jack, what in the world do you do in November?
I thought about that, and actually, the nice thing is it doesn't matter because I live in South Carolina, and But actually, I often put that back to I have family members say, "Who are you going to vote for?" And I just say, "It doesn't matter who I vote for, but you're in a swing state. Who are you going to vote for?"
Well, let's not forget. Hold on, let me make this holy for a second. Let's not forget not to cast the first stone. Do we all report every ounce of income we have on our tax returns?
I do.
Every dollar you receive, buddy, if you give you $20.
I do. Let me tell you,
you're a better man than me, Jack. All right.
Well, I'm just saying, and I realize most people don't, but it's like I don't understand that. If you're a believer, the Bible's very clear about that. Or
let's say, when I hear about Trump and his past, he's admitted to his infidelity. He actually claims that most of that was his fault. I admire that. I personally hold the opinion that biblically you should not remarry until your spouse has died.
But
or
Karen, you've got to acknowledge that Trump has got to do like politicizing. I mean, do you really think he's like sorry and regretful? I mean, I'm not going
When
to
I
say
heard him say it, I thought it sounded very genuine. But the whole point is everyone's calling out his flaws. I'm sorry, we're all sinners. We all have flaws, some worse than others.
Yeah.
I
Do you
don't
think he
think
sounds
it's.
genuine when he says you're fired?
Yes, I do, and I hope he says that to a lot of folks in the current political establishment.
All right, weird question. Do you think? You just have to bear with me with these questions. Do you think there's a higher chance of an assassination on Donald Trump than recent presidents?
I don't think so. I think Obama really took the cake with how angry people were at him. People may not like Trump, but I don't think they see him as the traitor that Obama is, because he's committed treason on multiple occasions, and I don't know why he hasn't had to stand trial for that. But
is that even a logical question to think through?
Oh, I don't know, Joey. I mean, it just seems like most of the assassinations in U.S. history have been lone wolves, and who can tell when the next one will emerge?
Yeah.
But if you're talking about a climate that would cause assassination, what you're talking about is great contempt for the president, and I think Obama had a lot of contempt. I think it'd be hard to rival that, but it is kind of a silly question.
Yeah. Do you think with a Trump presidency, this will be a point in history, the election of 2016, where we'll reflect on just how drastic America changed from that point on?
I think so.
And you would say probably for the better.
Probably for the better, but definitely different. That's the one thing I think a lot of people shouldn't realize about Trump is, and I would disagree with, I think Jack said some things earlier where he's not sure what Trump would do. I think Trump's actually very transparent. He may not tell us everything, but I think you can believe what he says. I think he has an intent to follow through on everything he's saying. Whereas, and then there was the other analogy, would Trump win against any other presidential candidate besides Hillary? Or in any other election cycle? Probably not. But would that have been a good thing? Because what we've had is just presidents and congressmen that go in and they don't change anything. It's just been the same downhill slide for, almost 30 years.
Kerry, I understand that you're not voting for a pastor. You're voting for a president and all that stuff. But I'm just puzzled with the history that Trump has with dishonesty, why you think all of a sudden he's a super honest guy when he's talking.
Well, that's the thing. How do I know he's dishonest? For me, that's hearsay. I don't know the man well enough to know that, and I can't make a judgment call on whether he's honest or dishonest. All I can do as an informed voter is see what I can see. I watch the news all the time. I watch Trump's speeches, and I gauge him as best I can. Hopefully, one-on-one, like first person, like I'm hearing this from his mouth. I don't want to hear it through the media spin, because that's never reliable. So the best that I've heard, the best that I've seen, as much as I've seen, I have no way to gauge that he's being dishonest. I'm sorry. For me, my gauge says he's being honest. I have no reason to believe he's being dishonest.
All right.
Joey, going back to your question about the beginning of unbelievable change. I mean, for me, I think maybe on a superficial level, like maybe the tone and the rhetoric will change, but I still believe that Congress is so deadlocked and so polarized. I don't really see how much change can actually happen with anybody as president. So that's me being a pessimist, I know, but so I don't think so.
What do you think about that, Jack?
Yeah, so what I would say is that most times in U.S. history, if there haven't been external dangers, like, a dangerous international environment, war, whatever, then usually the country does pretty well under divided government, because it's good when the government can't do very much. And that's kind of
I agree.
And that's kind of the way our system is designed. The challenge I see is I feel like we've got, a dangerous international environment, and just hard to tell how it'll play out.
Jared, do you think that Hillary has been really trying to be the next president so she can kind of get her intern and kind of show her husband, like, top him? Do you think?
Heck yeah, man. Absolutely.
All right. Well, does anybody have any questions for anybody else? Carrie, maybe a question as far as Jack not supporting Trump, or Jack, a question for Kerry as far as his support for him. Anything that you guys were kind of hoping to talk about that we didn't touch on?
I guess for me, I do have a question for Kerry. I mean, I really want to be more open-minded about this. And I feel like I've probably given Trump not a fair shake because I'm going by so much hearsay, what people were saying about him saying this and that and the other. Is there a good source, like a good place to, I don't know, to get the real story? That's probably not even
Trump's
possible.
website, his
No, you
website.
know what I mean, I guess it's an
Well,
impossibility because you're gonna have people with agendas either way. But I feel like I want to cut through the BS and I wanted to really find out what Trump's really about, if that's even possible.
yeah, here's what I would suggest. Number one, the website. His website. I'll be honest with you, I really don't think people go to it and actually read through the positions. But I think what you also have to do is listen to the people around him, the close people he's surrounding himself with. Listen to what Carson says about him. He's got someone. I'm sorry, this is not racist or whatever because I don't know, but I think he's got someone who's working for him on the like the Middle Eastern side, talking about international policy with the Mideast. I think his name is Waleed or something. But
Okay.
whenever he comes on and talks about Trump's foreign policy, that's Trump's advisor, and it's great information. And then, of course, I would always recommend listening directly to the candidates themselves, whether that be Hillary or Trump, because I can't tell you how many times Trump has said something, and then immediately it's spun in the media. And I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of frustrating. It's also frustrating because I think people do it with the Bible too, but I realize this isn't. We're doing political tonight.
Yeah, it is frustrating because I guess I'm pretty passive when it comes to politics, rightly or wrongly. So all I'm picking up is what people around me are saying, and I know that's not always the most reliable thing. And I also think that probably for the most part, I'd be more in line with his policies, but his rhetoric, that's what I'm fearful of. If he's really going to be the kind of guy that's going to be shooting at the hip and offending all these people, racially or whatever, I don't want to get behind a guy like that. So I guess that's my fear
He's
with
like
supporting Trump.
every address he gives on TV, all the Americans have that feeling that you have, like when you have a guest over for dinner and they always say
Drunk
crazy
uncle.
stuff, and you're just like, oh gosh, please,
Yeah,
my
I mean, I don't
dad's
know.
sitting here.
Right, right.
Well, I think some of there too is there's shock value in what he says, but I think it's shocking because nobody says that, right? The past 8 years, it's all political correctness. Oh, no one says that. I sometimes get anxiety about what he's going to say, but then once he said it, I realized, you know what? I'm glad he said it. He said what needed to be said, and now I can actually breathe a sigh of relief that it's out there.
Yeah.
That's how I feel anyway.
Okay. All right.
Jack, any closing thoughts?
The issue I have with him is very similar to the issue I had with Obama in 2008. Here's a guy with no experience in the realm he's about to enter, and he was just a blank slate that people projected on. People projected, they saw what they wanted to see, they heard what they wanted to hear, and I think that's the deal with Donald Trump. There are a lot of people who find him off-putting, but my concern is that I think his history shows that he's not a person of integrity. And right now, is he lying deliberately, or does he just not care what comes out of his mouth? I have no idea, but I don't trust a word that he says. So, again, that's my take. I'm not trying to, I hope I'm saying that respectfully, because I understand that there are people who feel very differently and some people that I respect.
And it's interesting you made the parallel with Obama because, back in 2008, it was all about hope. And it kind of seems like now that whole notion of hope has been appropriated by the right. So it's like Trump is our new hope. You know what I'm saying? I kind of see that parallel too.
Well, I think that's part of his popularity is,
Yeah.
People are angry and they've lost hope that the economic system works.
Right.
And in particular for a lot of people that can possibly work for them. And he's appealed to that.
Yeah. Interesting
All
stuff.
right. Well, I hope everyone is a little more prepared for November, having heard this episode. We got a lot of time between now and then. We'll see who he chooses as his running mate and all that stuff. We will definitely be having a Hillary Clinton episode as well coming up in the future. I'm going to have to find a Hillary supporter. So that's
Hey, let me ask Jack a quick question.
Yeah.
So, Jack, is there anybody that Trump could put on his ticket that would make you reconsider?
Jesus.
Living and breathing today
Yeah.
on Earth.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. I think one of the appeals about putting his daughter as his vice president is that it would make him less impeachable. I mean, I think he would be afraid to put a really popular person on his ticket because, people kind of gave Obama a pass where, in my mind, I don't think that they should have. But
Okay.
I don't think people are going to give him a pass.
Yeah.
And part of it just being vindictive politicians
Sure.
who are angry at, but honestly, I'd be surprised if he has a candidate, a running mate that is a really strong person.
Fair enough.
So yeah, my final question would be, Jack, come November, who are you going to vote for?
Here's what I do when I face two appalling choices: is I go vote, but I don't vote for that office, and that's kind of what I cannot envision voting for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. So I'll probably just pass.
Next.
I'm gonna write in Donkey Kong or something.
Do you feel like that's helpful to the nation to pass, though?
I understand. It's a tough one because, like you said, I feel a little bit like it's being weaselly, but I can't in good conscience, I don't think, vote for either person.
I mean, Barabbas or Judas? Who would you vote for, Kerry?
No, I applaud Jack. At least he seems like he's going to stay true to his convictions, because I can tell you that the people that kicked me out of the Facebook group come November will probably eventually just vote Republican because, of course, they want Hillary. And
straight ticket.
I think what I told them was like, I appreciate if you have that conviction, at least stick to it, right? You can't say that you're going to vote for the lesser of two evils in November, but yet accuse me of not being Christian because I support Trump today. And this was, of course, when people like Cruz and stuff were in the race.
Right.
So I at least applaud him for that, although I don't think it'll be helpful to the nation.
And I can understand that. Again, it's one that I don't feel like it's a good choice. I just feel like it's maybe the least bad choice.
Thanks for listening to this Trump edition of Pastor with No Answers. I'm sure a lot of you guys changed your minds on what you thought about Trump. Some of you now believe in him. Some of you, you're just like, I can't believe I thought he'd make a good president. Either way, we're happy that you listened. Go to pastorwithnoanswers.com. Check out how to connect with us. You can also contribute to this podcast if you want. Next week, we've got Dan Koch and Jack Hoy, the son of the Jack Hoy that was on today's episode. And they're going to be talking about, both of these guys are Christians, and they're going to be talking about the possibility that God never stops redeeming humanity throughout all eternity. And would it be crazy if he did just once and for all say, okay, these people are lost forever? It's an interesting dialogue, goes into many different directions. We know you'll enjoy it. See you around next week.